So after I create the first name field, I can come in and create a tag that's going to surround this first name. It's going to be called the label tag. And I'm going to have a opening and a closing tag surrounding the label like that. So once you have the label tag surrounding it, you want to go ahead and add a for attribute, and the for is basically going to reference whatever you have over in the input tag. It's going to reference the name that you've given it, so you want to give it the exact attribute that is name inside of the input tag. So I'm going to say fName, because that's exactly the way I put it in the other one, and this will be associated, this label will be associated with this input type when the form is submitted at the end. So you won't see any difference if I refresh. You won't see any difference on the front end, but it will make a difference inside of our email once we receive them in our email inbox. Okay, so we've got the label for. Now I'm just going to take this and I'm going to copy it and use them on all of the different text pieces that I've created here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a closing tag label like that, and then after the label I'm going to go ahead and start my input type for the next one. So let me show you one thing about input types. If I go to W3 Schools, I can see a lot of the input type attribute options that I have for this input type. And these are all fairly new with HTML5. All these are values that I can use with the type attribute. I can create a button out of an input type, so like the type will show up as a button. I can do a checkbox. I can do a color picker, I can do a date, I can do a date and time, I can do an email address, I can do a file, I can provide a hidden input field. That would be more in depth. We don't need that for our purposes. I can create an image for the submit button. I can use a month, I can add a number, I can specify it for a password. I can use the telephone number here. I can use a submit button. So you can see a lot of different options that I have available. I can use a reset button if somebody needs to reset the fields that are prepared for this submission. I can do that. So all of these have their own little flair to them, and they're kind of communicating what these are a little bit more clear. So I can make all of these attributes, kind of spell them out, and then I could just copy this because they're all going to have something similar. So I'm just going to add these as input types. These are all empty tags, and I'll use the input type for last name is going to be text. I'm going to create a name called lname. I'm going to connect that with this label for. Remember, we need to make sure that these are all different, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those so they don't, so I have them as a default. So I have them as a default, and then I've got type, name, placeholder on the back end. Placeholder for last name is going to be last name. So if I save that, I can go back to my file and you'll see that this field has been added for all of them, but I need to do some of those specifically. I'm going to say TEL, that's what was used on HTML5, and I'm going to say name is phone, and I'm going to give it a label for of phone as well. Save. Now I'm not going to add a placeholder here, and the reason I'm not going to add a placeholder, I could probably go in and do like parentheses and do like area code and then 123-1234 like that. And we're doing a very basic form, And I need to add more to this if I'm going to be specific like that. It'll be like this. I mean, I could put in my own number, the area code 123, then 123, and 1234, and that would go through. So I'm not exactly making a placeholder that works. I can, if I give them that statement, they probably will figure it out that I'd prefer them to do this. But the placeholder to me is when they put in their numbers, that those the parentheses and the dash would come up automatically in between those numbers, but it doesn't do that at this point. So that's a little misleading to me. For now, I'm just going to leave it without a placeholder for the phone number. Okay, so last name is required. I want to go ahead and put an asterisk in between the label and the input. I'm going to give a space in between all these because I'm doing that to give it some space in between the title and then this field. You can see if I do that and hit refresh, there's a little more spacing in between the field and the title that it's given for the label that it's given. Okay, so there's the phone. I can give it a size and a max length again. Remember what I said about 30 being the size for this first name? So if I just did 30, let's start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So you can see that there's 30. It's a size of 30 characters. That's how big this field is. But I can go as far as 50. So 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. So I can't go any further after 50. So that's how the max length works and the size of the actual field itself works. Okay, then the email address. I remember I had the email option, which is the value could be email right here. So I'm just going to put an email, put in a name for the email so that I can connect it with the label for email. Placeholder. Again, I can do a placeholder here, but because I don't have any expectation, I don't have any constraints for them that requires them to have an @ sign when they submit it at this point. I need to add those at some point in the future, but I don't have to, so I'm just going to take the placeholder off, save, and I am going to say required for this one. Required. I'm going to put the asterisk in between to let them know, hey, I do want the email address. Then I have the business name. Input type will be text. Name will be B name. And placeholder, I don't need a placeholder for that either. And then I'm going to just do message as both the label for and the name. I'm actually not going to use the input type. Instead, I'm going to use a different tag, and that's going to be the text area tag. And you have a text area, and you have both the opening and closing tag for the text area, so I'm just going to delete that. This looks a little different than the input type. Most of what you're going to do in a form is going to be an input type, but in this case, we want to create a bigger field than just one line or one element of an input type, so we're going to create a box for text area. So we're going to create the text area. The name is going to still be message. Then I'm going to say max length equals 1000. Let's just pick that number for fun. Then we're going to say columns, which is COLS, and we're going to say rows. And we're going to say equals rows. Now the max length is how many characters somebody can put into this text area, remember? The columns is the amount of amount of horizontal space we're talking about, and then rows is the amount of vertical space in this message. So if I put 6 rows and 1 column, you'll see what I'm talking about if I hit refresh. It's only giving me one real narrow column. So I can do 20, save and refresh, and then it looks a lot more like a text area. Now at this point I want to have a little more control over the spacing area. So I'm going to put a BR tag after my input types so that each input field is and then label is on its own line. Save and refresh. So now you can see how this works. Okay, so there's the text area. If you want to show something as a placeholder inside the text area field, you simply put the information inside the text area and just say message. So that's what's going to show up in this message box unless somebody puts it in there. And of course, that's what's going to show up unless somebody takes that and deletes it and puts something else in there. Now the last one is going to just be an input type equals submit. An input type submit, and then have a value, and that's the other attribute we need. The value goes submit. If we want the option for them to be able to reset it, I can just copy that, save it, but we need to change this type to reset, and then the value, which is what's going to show up on the button itself, is reset form. Save. And make sure you do your BR. We did that already, so save, oops. Refresh, and you'll see the submit or the reset form option below it. So I can go in right now and say Scott, Clifton, give him a number. And I can give them a business name. So once you finish your form, at least the basic elements of what you want your form to have, I would like you to try to do a radio button or something else that would make more elements available to potential forms and make it easier on people when they're submitting information. But in this case, it's a very simple form. We just want it to be able to submit, and we'd like to stylize it now.